Hello everyone, we are here with the second edition of Hyper Annotation from New Center in the Venice Biennale. We are talking to Yilmaz Dziewior, the curator of German Pavilion today. So Yilmaz, can you tell us more about the pavilion this year, how the idea came about? Because I realized that you are actually interrogating and somehow questioning the space itself. And as I understood correctly, it's going to be an ongoing thing. It's not a show that it's there and it's going to be there during the Biennale. So can you tell us more about it?
The project by Maria Eichhorn, relocating a structure she developed for the German Pavilion here in Venice, consists of several components. One component is the concept to relocate the pavilion, the architecture of the pavilion. We hired two companies to develop different concepts. One concept was to to divide the pavilion in several pieces and then put them on a ship and put them away for the time of the biennial. And the other concept, the company we hired, they found a crane strong enough to lift up the whole pavilion, put it on a ship and then move it away. So that would mean for the duration of the biennial, this place would be empty. And this project exists. We developed it very in detail. And this is part of the whole project, relocating a structure. Another part is tours through the city, and the tours will happen twice a week during all the time of the biennial. And the tours will go to anti-fascist monuments. We worked here together, Maria Eichhorn worked together with IVESA, an institution who is specialized on the anti-fascist movement in Venice and in Italian. Then another component is the book with the history of the pavilion, of the architecture, but also the history of the biennial. And then another component, and that is maybe what most of the people will see, is in the pavilion itself, where Maria, she removed the plaster of the wall exactly at the places at the joints between the old pavilion and the new pavilion. Because what we found out doing our research, what Maria Eichhorn found out doing the research, is that the old pavilion, which originally was inaugurated in 1909, was then the Bavarian Pavilion, that this still exists, it's still there. And the Nazis, they didn't destroy the old pavilion, but they put on top of this pavilion, made it higher, and they prolonged the pavilion, they made it deeper in space. And when you come into the German Pavilion, through the work of Maria Eichhorn, you see the joints between the old one and the new building. You see the fundament, the wall she excavated, and you really get an idea of the original pavilion.
Wow, that's amazing. That's like both literal and at the same time somehow conceptual interrogation.
Yes.
And like I see like the point of critical inquiry that is there with the historical aspect of German Pavilion. How do you somehow situate it with like Biennale this year? How can you bring together this history of this pavilion inside the venue of Venice Biennale? Is there like a kind of communication there too?
So actually the main topic of the biennial showing a lot of women, which I think is great, women artists, and dealing with question of surrealism. That is sort of like the overall topic of the main biennial. But actually the pavilions are sort of like independent. They do not necessarily react to the main topic. I think it's interesting that at the German Pavilion now also a woman is presented. But Maria Eichhorn dealt with the history of the biennial. For example, she was looking how the history of the Venice Biennale is connected to colonialism, for example. It was at the same time, and for example, it's very interesting that a small country like Belgium was one of the first to have a pavilion. We know why, because Belgium was a big colonial, so they had a lot of money, and that why it is strongly connected, colonialism with the history of the biennial. And what I also like how Maria Eichhorn reflects the special situation is, if you imagine if the pavilion wouldn't be there, so it would be an empty space, the surrounding pavilions, they would have more space, like the Korean pavilion, the Japanese, the Canadian, the British, the French. The space would be bigger. And what I also like about this idea, the concept about the relocation, is that through the absence of the pavilion, there is the saying, right, the elephant in the room. Through the absent, it becomes even more present, and you are even more engaged in discussing about the history of the pavilion. So it has several levels actually through the, to the biennial and through this situation here in the Giardini.
That's amazing. I can see how there are layers of inquiry. And you mentioned the main show, the surrealism. One thing that is not mentioned in the main show is the historical aspect of surrealism that is more politically engaged, has had like more anti-fascism and more political resistance to it. It's more looking toward the future. So I was wondering how you see that, like the kind of side that they're taking. Maybe it's a little bit more optimistic. And maybe now I see the German pavilion is looking back with like a kind of critical look through its history, through the history of Biennale. Do you see like this insight into the future that can be optimistic too, or can you bring together this two kind of approach together in conversation? Do you think there is a conversation there?
The project by Maria Eichhorn for the German pavilion looks back in the past, that's right. She analyzed, the history of the pavilion, how it was altered architectural-wise. She deals with the ownership, who owns the pavilion, the history and so forth. But she also deals with, I fear, also with the future by, dealing with totalitarianism, like with, looking at how German was a fascist state. We see now in the current times, if you look into the world, that a lot of rigid systems become very strong and totalitarian systems. And I think that this will also be part of our future, and I think that's interesting with Maria's project, that she shows, that happened already, and we don't know what will happen in the future, but she connects it to the current time. Like, for example, with the tours to the anti-fascist monument, they take place here and now, and they are urgent, these tours, I would say, to make the people sensible that at the moment there are current movements which are totalitarian.
Thank you so much. And maybe one last question, now that we are talking about like how the current state of affairs is going on. Maybe it's not bad to mention COVID too. Like, COVID is not over, but we are gathering again in venues like Biennale, in galleries again. How do you see that, this new kind of circulation of art? Like, what possibilities can be revitalized? How do you see, maybe, like, it's too big of a word to say future of art word, but like, as a curator, what has changed? What are the possibilities, or what difficulties are we facing now?
I think that COVID had a strong impact also for us to, for example, we did a lot of research, we went to a lot of archives, and it was very difficult to go because archives were closed. Even when they're open, they were very limited, and so that has an impact. And my personal experience was that, and I feel this also here with all these people here now, that there's really an urge that after all these Zoom talks and after all these video conferences, there's an urge really on the one hand to meet the people physically, like meet them analog, not only digital, and to meet art, to see art not only in the internet, but really to encounter. And most of all, and that's why I like the biennial so much, I really believe in the social potential of art. And I think if you see how the different nations interact with each other, and I don't want to sound too optimistic, but I really feel this here, that the dialogue you have with the different participants and the exchange, that this helps much more than, for example, other things. That's why I always have a strong voice to also economically, that the state should support the arts, because in the end the arts helps a lot to keep the peace and freedom, actually. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for being with us. And
Yeah, it's
talking to us.
great. It's great.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thank you.